It's good to see you here this morning. If you don't have one of the outlines and you'd like one, if you raise your hand, those men in the back will be sure and take care of you. While that's being done, I want to read in the book of 2 Corinthians, 11th chapter, verses 1 through 4. The Apostle Paul says, "Would to God you would bear with me a little in my folly, and indeed bear with me. For I am jealous over you with godly jealousy, for I have espoused to you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. But I fear lest by any means as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your minds should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. For he that cometh preacheth another Jesus, whom we have not preached, or if you receive another spirit which you have not received, or another gospel which you have not accepted, you might well bear with it." The Apostle Paul looks and he wants us to realize, if you're a child of God, you're married. You are, we collectively, we individually, we are the bride of Christ. We have been espoused to Christ. In Ephesians, the 5th chapter, verse 22 through 23, the Apostle Paul talks about that very thing. He points out later as he relates the relationship between husband and wife, he said, "This is a mystery I speak concerning the church." But Jesus looks at us as his bride. And we see that and we realize that there are responsibilities. You know, a marriage on this earth, there are rules and regulations. There is the aspect of living for one another. Jim was talking about it last week and talking about marriage as God had created it. And he said, you know, you've ever heard about marriage being a 50-50? And he said, no, that's wrong. It is 100-100. Christ gave himself for us. We give ourselves for him. That is what he expects of us. But one of the words used here is something that helps us to understand one aspect of that. We are, the Apostle Paul says, chaste. C-H-A-S-T-E. You think about that word, and that's what we're going to speak about, and he says that's what you ought to be. And he was worried because there are so many things that can pull us away from that type of life that is chaste. He says that Satan can beguile our minds, that we will be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. In other words, in Christ, it's really pretty simple. It's not that hard to understand what God expects us to be as his bride. And we need to realize that the devil, he is there. He's going to pull us away. He's going to try to deceive us. Part of his arsenal is, of course, to work upon the mind, the heart, to pull us away after our own desires instead of giving that 100%. We love him with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind. There's nothing left. And so we look at that and we realize then that being chaste must be something that's pretty important. And if you look at it, you know, what does the word chaste mean? If you define it and you look at the various words, you find that it's pure from every fault, immaculate. You look and you find in the book of Philippians, the 4th chapter, even our thoughts and hearts. You know, you think upon those things that are pure. You look and you find that our word, chaste, we don't use that very much. But we do use the word pure. We use the word modest, that is, in control, that we're going to remain aloof, away from those things that corrupt. The words that W.E. Vine, who is one of the lexicographers, he says clear, holy, pure. Thayer says pure from carnality, chaste, modest, pure from every fault, clean. I mean, you know, clean isn't just an outward, but it is who I am. And God wants us, he calls a chaste virgin. That word virgin, again, would indicate a purity. I've refused to go over into association with the world. We know that friendship with the world is enmity with God, and he calls those who do it adulterers and adulteresses. In other words, you've lost that purity whenever we turn to the world. And so it's easy for us to see what the word means, but you think about demonstrations of it. Can I look in the Scriptures and find anybody who has demonstrated this? You look in the book of Esther, in chapter 1. And you know the book is named after Esther, but Esther came to prominence because of a lady who refused certain things. The king asked her in Esther 1 to dance. You look at that and it comes as a pretty clear realization. He was talking about something immoral. He was talking about being impure before others. He wanted to display this queen before others. And she refused. It cost her greatly, but she refused to be gazed upon by others. We see a lot today about how women are especially looked at, but it doesn't end there. All you have to do is look at advertisements. You know, doesn't matter whether you're advertising a car, a lawnmower, or whatever, you're going to find somewhere to where people put forth, you know, if you want to mow like a champ, you have this woman who is dressed in a very alluring way, or this man who is running around showing off his muscles. Now, why are they doing that? It's an appeal to the baser idea, the baser element. Vashti said, I'm not going to live that way. You know, we are to adorn ourselves so that we will allow others to see Christ in us. You know, I hope that, you know, we all take care of our bodies the way we can, but we don't do it to put ourselves on display, to become part of that worldly aspect. It's amazing to me, you know, you find so many things, you know, that put forth, especially in this day, how people are making merchandise of men and women. And then the very same ones who speak against that, and rightly so, will themselves act, dress, talk in such a way that they are, in essence, inviting it in one sense. That doesn't make it right. You know, whenever we look upon others, it doesn't matter what they do, how they act. We don't have any right to treat them in that fashion, to look at them in that way. But it makes it more difficult whenever the world says, I want to dress ungodly, I want to appear ungodly, I want to talk ungodly, I want to be in ungodly places, but by the way, don't you look at me ungodly. It's a battle that we can win ourselves because we make a choice what we're going to do with it. But isn't it much harder whenever the problem is increased by people who would, if they'd have been Vashti back then, said, well, yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. I'll put myself on display, and by the way, don't you think anything bad. I mean, it's absurd. But being chaste means that I am going to refuse this concept. I am going to, Peter talks about, the woman who, as her husband, is even looking upon her, that he sees that heart that's given to God. And so I need to look and see what is my life like? Am I being a Vashti? Or am I being like those who in the Scriptures are dressed, act in such a way to entice others? And then, of course, there's Joseph. In the book of Genesis, we find where he was in the household of Potiphar. And he was there, and he was entrusted with so much. As a matter of fact, he speaks and he says, you know, my master has entrusted me with everything. He's given everything to me except for you, speaking of Potiphar's wife. But this woman wanted to lie with him. There again, you know, you contrast that with Vashti. Vashti wouldn't, you know, no, I don't even want you to look at me. This woman took it a step further and said, come, lie with me. But what Joseph did is he refused to compromise morality. And you know the temptation was there. You know, we all can be tempted. And we make the decision, though, James talks about, whether we're going to allow that lust, that temptation to conceive. And if it conceives, then sin is brought forth. Joseph said, no. How can I do this? I'm not going to treat your husband, my master, in that way. He trusts me. But how can I do this and sin against God? His morality wasn't for sale. He was chaste. He said, I'm going to remain pure. I'm going to remain holy in the eyes of God and in the actions I set forth. In the book of 1 Peter, we find the first century Christians as they themselves faced many things that we do. In 1 Peter, the 4th chapter, beginning in verse 1, he says, "Forasmuch then as Christ has suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves likewise with the same mind. He that has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, that he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh to the lust of men, but to the will of God. For the time past of our life may suffice us to have wrought the will of the Gentiles when we walked in lasciviousness, lust, excess of wine, revelings, banquetings, abominable idolatries." And then he says, "Wherein they think it strange that you run not with them to the same excess of riot, speaking evil of you." You know, I don't know if everybody has it. You know, I go, Lana and I go, we'll be going in May, I believe it is, down to Texas for a reunion, grade school reunion. And a lot of those people that I grew up with, not only in grade school, but all through high school. And sometimes, sadly, whenever they find out, you know, "What are you doing now, Jack?" "Well, I'm a preacher." They just kind of do a double take. "You're a preacher." And they think it's kind of funny. Because, like you, I sinned. I did things. Everybody, Romans 3 and verse 23, we've sinned and come short of the glory of God. May not be the exact thing, but sin is sin in God's eyes. But the fact is, we put forth this image that they see. And so whenever I was growing up, I went along with the crowd. I would do certain things. I would involve myself. And I remember whenever I became a Christian, there were certain people that they made it their goal to try and knock me off. In other words, you know, "Hey, how about this? How about this?" The temptation. And when that didn't work, they'd just say a few things about it. Well, every one of us has had that, don't we? I mean, you know, it may be that at work, at school, family members, friends, neighbors, you make the decision whenever you become a child of God. I walked in the way of Gentiles. I did that. But I'm not going to do it anymore. And we know that there is a cost with that. Sometimes people speak evil of you. They may mock you. "Oh, a little holier than thou, are we? You just think you're the only one that can follow God. You think you're the only one that's right. Everybody," I mean, they begin to look and to attack. And I make a choice. Peter said, you stay that way. This is going to happen. They're going to talk about you, but you do not give in to peer pressure. You know, that's one of the saddest things, you know, that people give in to be like the world. We know what we ought to live like. We know what it is to be chaste, to be pure, free from carnality, free from those sins. I don't want to be like that. But sometimes I give in and I want to appeal. I want to do those things that cause people to look at me. I want to do things that will allow me to fulfill my lusts, my desires. I want to fit in with everybody else. I don't want them talking that way. So I do the things that are expected in this world. You know, that's a horrific thing. You know, I look and, you know, the other day, Nora came up to me and said, 2 more days, I'll be 9 years old. That's hard to believe, isn't it? But you look at the ones we have, the little ones, getting bigger, teenagers, getting their driver's license, graduating from school, and you look and you think, Lord, I pray that they will continue to be chaste, that they'll be pure, because the temptations are there. You get to the time you're dating, what do? Well, this is what's expected on a date. You know, you just push the boundaries or see which ones you can topple. Well, you say, well, I didn't go that You know, the writer in Proverbs talks about a good name is to be had rather than great riches. You can destroy that. We can destroy it in reality as we succumb to those things, or we can destroy it by giving that appearance. Paul said, you prove all things, you hold fast that which is good, you abstain from the very appearance of evil. In other words, I know who I ought to be, and I don't want to give the world a place to stand to say, oh, Jack, I see you. I know what you... I said, I didn't do that. Well, why were you there then? Why were you with those people? Why were you in that place? Why did you dress like that? If you didn't want me to think that, why? Well, you think what you want, but well, the reality is, I can't control people's deepest thoughts, but I can refuse to give them a reason to have those thoughts. They may have them anyway, but I can say, okay, I'm going to take very, very close care of my reputation. I don't want to appear as if I'm ungodly in my dress, in my language, in my actions, the places I go. I'm not going to give in to these things, even for a little while. I'm not going to look and give in to your pressure. I'm going to follow Christ. Jesus suffered and died for us, leaving us an example that we should follow in his footsteps. He did no sin. I wish every one of us could say, hey, I never sinned. Yeah, we do. 1 John tells us, that we sin. But he points out in verse 9, you repent of these things. You confess these things to God, and he's faithful. He's just. He'll forgive you for all unrighteousness, but I got to stop it. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to live the life that I professed I would whenever I became a child of God. We sing that song sometimes, just as I am. And I think some people get a little bit of the wrong picture. That doesn't mean I come to God and I just continue as I am. Paul refuted that in Romans 6. Shall we continue in sin? God forbid. You see, I'm a different person. I put that old man of sin to death and I rise to walk in the newness of life. So I don't go into those things anymore. Is it hard? Yeah. Do you stand out? Yeah. But not because I'm ungodly, because I'm a light that's shining in a world of darkness. So I see these examples and so many more. The Apostle Paul told Timothy, he said, let no man despise thy youth. Be that example of the believers, and that's who we ought to be. And I want to tell you something. I became a child of God in my late 20s, and it was harder. The other day, again in Jim's class, they were talking about how young people versus older people get married. Sometimes you get set in your ways. You get, Lan and I were both babies, 18 years old. We didn't have any ways to get set in. But you get a little later, you set in your ways. Same thing, if you delay becoming a child of God, making that decision to take a stand, gets so much harder. You get kind of used to it. The writer in Hebrews 3 talked about that. Exhort one another daily while it's called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. This idea, I know what you're talking about, and later on, but right now, the writer in Ecclesiastes said, when do you start? In the days of your youth. And he talks about in that text, sowing wild oats. Well, they're young, they're going to be that way. No, they're not. Not if they make that decision. And I guarantee you, if you start young, it's going to be so much easier when you get older. People will just expect it of you. That's who you are. That's the good name. And people look. If you are involved in ungodliness, they're going to be those that are going to just tempt you to go a little further and further, because in Romans 1, they not only do those things, but they have pleasure in others that do them. Misery loves company, sin loves company. But if you make that decision when you're young, I'm going to make the right decisions. I know it's not popular. Jesus said it wouldn't be. Matthew the 7th chapter, there are few that find it. But I'm going to do that. And I'm going to be an example of the believers. I'm not going to try to fit in with the world. I'm not going to give in to peer pressure. I'm not going to compromise morality. I'm not going to become the eye of the world in the sense that that's what I live for. Instead, I'm going to live for God. And you make that decision when you're young, and it's amazing what you can accomplish and what other people begin to expect of you. And instead of expecting, hey, you used to do this, come on. It'll be, you've always been that way, hadn't you? And you smile and say, yeah, that's right. That's who I am. And that's what I'm going to stay. But then you look and you think about it. It's a choice that we have. I can be chaste or I can be chaste, Chased. In other words, the world is going to look to me and say, oh, Jack's having such fun. Man, that's good. Let's go out with him. Let's do these things. He's always this way. He's a ball of fun. Did you have a good time last weekend? I don't know. I don't remember, but must have been good. The world looks at that foolishness like that. But God looks and he says, you need to be different. We can, in the Old Testament, it sadly talks about people playing the harlot. In other words, they wanted to be that way. We don't do that. Demas he even forsook Paul. Why? Because he loved the present world. Price is too great. He made a choice. We choose by our actions. We can engage in worldliness. We can fit in. We can be ungodly in this world of darkness and just be like everybody else. Don't make waves. I can look and I can do it in my words, the language of Ashdod. One of the things that is, and I know there are words that change and they have no connection with what is past. But a lot of times we use what's called euphemisms, and we know what it refers to, and yet we keep on. Somebody said, well, I don't cuss. But if I tell you, okay, we're going to say the number 3, that means I want to play like I'm the God of heaven and I'm going to condemn you. In other words, I can use the terms that say that. What's the difference if I say that, or I just look at you and I say 3? There's no difference. I can dress it up, but it's still the same thing. We can, the Old Testament uses the language of Ashdod. In other words, speaking like the world. And a lot of times we speak not with the idea of glorifying God, but fitting in. That's the way everybody talks. The other day, Lana was talking. She said, it's odd to me how we have a culture now that's going to, they're going to ban every book. They're going to ban, all sorts of things they're looking at because of this and this and this. They're trying to erase history. But she said, how can they attack that? And what brought it up was we're sitting by a car, and the car's going boom, 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 and all of these words on it that I couldn't hear. They were muffled, and I'm thankful for it. How is it that culture and society, the very ones in that car maybe want to condemn things, and yet turn up that music that is filled with such ungodliness? Just terrible things are said. I've pulled up, whenever it's warm outside, and you get up close and you roll up your window, turn up your radio as loud as you can so you won't hear that foolishness. But our society looks and they do that, and we say, well, that's just the way it is. No, not in my life. Or I can engage in that. And then again, like Vashti, I can dress in such a way. I can look and, what's your desire? I want to look good. I went in this morning and Lana was in the kitchen and I was dressed. I said, how do I look? He said, you're so handsome. I actually said, you're okay, you can go. But I'm up here. I want to look in such a way that I don't distract from things, that I don't lead your mind in a wrong place. I want you to hear the lesson, not see Jack. But the world, we can engage in that. That's just the way it is. And it's, like I said, there's handsome people, there's beautiful people, but it's something that is amplified if that person's a Christian, because that's the focus. So I look and I see, what is it that I do that shows whether I'm desiring to be chaste or whether I'm going to be chasing in part of the world. You look and you think about Romans the 12th chapter, verse 1 and 2. What's my goal? Am I striving to be conformed to this world? Acts the 17th chapter, you find that the charge was made against Christians in that day that they turned the world upside down. You see, we preach Jesus. Another king, the world, the things in the world, that's not my king. Christ is my king. And so I look and I want to show forth him. Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. I mean, whenever you and I get ready for work, we're going to go do this, we're going to go say that, we're going to be around these people. Is my goal, well, wait till they see me? Or are they going to see a Christian? I mean, you can be a beautiful person and you can be likable, but don't be ungodly. Make sure that your mind is to show forth Christ. To show forth Christ in the life so that they can look. And, Peter talks about be ready to give answer unto any man who asks a reason of the hope that's in you. If people listen to me, if they see my dress, if they see my actions, if they see where I go, are they going to say, whoa, you're a lot different? And you're going to say, well, it's because I'm a Christian. Or would that be the farthest thought as to what they're asking about? You see, we stand out. People say, well, I'm bashful, I don't want to be seen. We need to get over that. Because God says you've got a responsibility, Jack, to let your light shine. You need to be different. You need to stand out, but not for self, but for God. And so what is it that the world sees? What is it that I shine forth in this world? The danger of doing otherwise. If in a marriage, if one party in that marriage doesn't care about purity, doesn't care about being morally clean, how do you think that's going to work? How do you think it's going to work with us and God? You see, I can't be married to Christ and act like the world, because the very fact of me being a member of His church is I've been called out of the world. How much did He want that? He hung on the cross, shed His blood. And I look and I say, well, just a little bit. Okay. For those of you who are married, or you know somebody that's married, and you're going to counsel them, and they say, okay, how much worldliness can I engage in without offending Lana? How ungodly can I get? How much can I entice others to look at me in an ungodly way? Well, just a little bit. Just don't get carried away with it. Nobody would say that. You married that person. Live like you have that love that you said at first. Live like you're committed to them, like you made a vow to. We became children of God. We crucified that old man of sin. We repented of what we were, who we were, how we acted. We need to then continue steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine. We need to look and realize, as parents, we have the ability to teach young folk, this is the way you go. Ephesians, the 6th chapter. We're talking about bringing up this individual in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. This is the way we live. This is the way that we act. This is the way we talk. This is the things that we do. And we do it, and we tell them, you have one reputation, and you better protect it. There are going to be people who make false accusations, but you live in such a way that it won't stick. Don't you give them an answer, a reason to talk about you in an ungodly way. People talk about, today we live in the digital age. A lot of young folks are really shocked. Some older folks in years, and obviously immature in mind, are shocked. Whenever they go and they're going to take part in trying to get a job, trying to go to a college, and somebody said, "What? We happened to look on your social media. Wasn't too social. You engage in ungodliness." You said, "Well, I didn't really do it. We were just talking." Why would you want to put out that appearance? You see, we need to realize that God is such that He says, you live for me. We need to stand, 1 John, the 3rd chapter. You look and you find the purity that we are to have. That word pure in 1 John 3 talks about chaste, same word. But we need to stand in awe of who we are, that God has called us His children. Live like it. I grew up, my father, he'd say, son, you're Williams. You need to make sure that you live in such a way that you bring honor to this family. You don't disgrace the family. How much more so as children of God? Make sure you don't live, and I don't live in such a way as to bring dishonor to the one whom I am a bride of. I need to glorify Him, not shame Him, in each and everything that I do. I need to realize that I need to surround myself with like-minded people. You don't go out and live with ungodly individuals all week and then come and wash it off in an hour at services. We need one another. We need that fellowship. We need that encouragement, because this world, remember as we began, Paul said, the devil's out there and he wants to beguile you. And if we just look and say, well, I can live on the edge, we're just saying, come on, let's play a while, devil. Doesn't work that way. We walk in the light as He is in the light. So I make a choice, you make a choice. Today, who are we? You say, well, I know who I... What would the world say about you and I? A man, he worked at a company for years and years and years, and finally one of the other men was there, and he had known him all through the years, and somehow mention was made of the church. And the guy said, well, I remember the church crowd. He said, well, so am I. He said, well, we worked together for 20-something years. I never knew that. Why? I have kind of a easy out. I'm a preacher. I'm an elder. Expected. No, God expects it of all of us. I personally would be ashamed if I was around somebody for 20 years at work, at school, in the neighborhood and family, and say, oh, I didn't know you was a Christian. That's the time to cry your eyes out and fall down on your knees in prayer and say, God, forgive me. I failed you. I go out and people look and They know. That's my wife. We're married. No question about it. Don't try to hide it. Why would I hide my marriage to Christ? Well, maybe I'm not married to Christ. I realize then, if I've attained that time in life, I know right and wrong. If I'm not married to him in one sense, I'm married to the devil, because I'm following him. It's an either-or proposition. But the blessing is, God says, come unto me, all you that labor. Whosoever will, let him come and drink freely of the water. I mean, it's there. So I make the choice. But I got to begin. But once I begin, determine to continue steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine. And we'll be chaste. We'll be that which God allowed us to become. If we can help you to do that, let's do it as we stand and sing the song of invitation.